I've been working on this shot. This is a hanger by Spatial Katana. He posts a lot of like retro spatial animations on YouTube. You could look up his channel. Um, but I had seen the one he had posted one video, and I really liked the potential of this hanger that he built. So he let me use it, and I had used light instancing in this because these are all these lights are actually casting light into the scene. Um, but so this was I was already doing some light instancing stuff, so that's why I already had this scene like kind of set up. So that's why I'm going to do this tutorial because I can kind of just use this scene to show you how you can use these tools. So that's the final shot. There's the normals, the raw RGB, albedo, and here's the noisy version before I denoised it. So we went from this basically to this, and here's the volume, and that's with all the lights casting into it. It took almost 8 hours to render. I could get it down lower than that actually, but I that's just how long it took. I didn't once it started, I didn't want to stop it to mess with the settings, but it worked. So, but I'm going to use this scene to show you how you can instance lights. Now, I didn't do it exactly like I'm going to do it here, but I'm just going to do it the way I'm doing it here because I think it'll demonstrate how this can be useful. So, let's just get started on the tutorial. Okay, so here we got the hanger. And so what I did was I just took all the luminous surfaces and I put them on a new layer so that they would be separate from the other layer. And that's important because we don't want these casting a shadow. And what I did is I just copied them and put them into another layer. And on this layer, all I'm going to do is I'm going to point normal move the points just so they're a little bit behind the actual polys that made up the luminous geometry. And I would have went a little further, but that one section was determining how far I could go because I didn't want it to intersect with other geometry. So now all I'm doing here is I'm just going to create a triangle at the origin, 1 meter. It doesn't really matter the size, but the point order matters. So the point at the origin is 1, the top one is 2, and the right one is 3, and that's important to get this to work properly. So now I'm just flipping it to make sure it's facing the direction I want. And now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to move and rotate and scale this triangle just till it gets close to being where I need it. It doesn't have to be exact. And you could probably go through and do this. It would take about 5 minutes to do the whole thing. I only do a section of it here just to demo how you would do this. But everything's cloned at 15 meters. So all I would have to do would be to do one section and then clone it. But you'll see what I'm getting at. And they don't have to be exact because we could just use a heat shrink to suck it to the closest points. And remember, you want the normal to be facing the direction you want your light in. So that's why I'm rotating these ones. So now you'll see I'll just select the polys and do heat shrink and it'll suck it to the closest points. And then basically I could just clone that at 15 meters on the Z 8 times. And like I said, you would do this, you would do one whole section first and then clone it. But since I already did it, I have it in another layer. I'm just going to show you how I went about doing this. But like I said, you want the normal to be facing the direction you want your light facing in. Heat shrink it. So all you got to do is get it close and then just use heat shrink. And that's all I do. And then I clone it. Now I'm doing this center thing. Same thing, heat shrink. And that's all I'm going to show you, but you get the idea, and then you can just clone it. But so I think it took me like 6 minutes to do this one here. And you'll notice for that top long light, I broke that one up into 7.5 meter sections because the aspect ratio, you don't want to have really, the sampling gets bad if you were to leave that as one triangle and have that huge aspect ratio. So all I'm doing here is I'm selecting the points that I want, and I'm going to go to point color, and I'm just going to create a color for these points called light color. And it's important that you don't have any polygons selected here because it will tag the polygon and not the points. So even make sure you have no poly selected when you're doing this. So you'll see if I add that point color to the surface, and you can see in the info, the point info, it'll show you the color of the point. It's important that you can see that point color in the info because that tells you that you have a vertex map. And now all I'm doing here, you don't want the poly selected, you just want the points. And then I'm going to make them a little bit, these have more white in them, these lights, so that's why I'm doing a different color for them. It's the same color, but then I just take the saturation down a bit. Because these lights in the center had white in them. So now I have that point color on those polys, and we'll be able to use that point color to control our lights. So that's the gist of what I'm doing here. And what else I want to do is I also want to create a weight map so that we can control the intensity of these lights. Now, yeah, I could have created this weight map in layout, but I'm doing it here. But I'll adjust it in layout. So you can use a weight map to control any of the parameters of these lights. I'm going to use it to control the intensity, but you could easily create another one to control the fall off distance or any other value. So I'm just going to create them outside lights. I'm going to put a weight of 100 on them. And then for them center lights, I'm just going to put a weight of 50. So now we can suck that value when we instance our lights. We can use that value to control the light intensity, basically. So that's pretty much it. So we have the weight map for the intensity and the color map for the... Now all I'm doing here is I'm zeroing out the position and rotation for this light. I'm going to create an area light out of it. Just changing these settings. You don't want double-sided area lights. That will mess this up. So you make sure that's off. Turning the ambient down. I'm making it an area light. Turn it on inverse distance squared clamped. Fall off at 2 meters. So now what I'm doing is I'm loading an object layer. I'm going to load that triangle layer, the template. And you can see it there. Now keep in mind, you need to be in modeler and layout. You need to be in legacy mode in order to view the vertex color map. It'll still render, if you're using it to render, it'll render fine. But if you want to view the vertex color map, you need to be in legacy mode in both modeler and layout. So you can see the color map on there now. I was in legacy mode. The problem with me was that the light wasn't light in any of these. So once I put headlight on, then you can see the color. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding nodal motion. And we're going to get point info. And we want that to be on select the object, pick object clones or clone index. That's important. And that's the addition that Dennis made that makes this way better. So make sure you pick clone index. And now I'm getting another point info, a multiply, and an add. And basically we're just going to count by 3 through these points. And we're going to get the first point of each triangle. So that's what this is doing. I'm going to add -1, multiply by 3, and then add 1, and then go into the index. So that's going to give us the first point of each triangle. And then this is going to give us the second and the third point. So now what we're going to do to get the position is we can just get the position of the point. And you can see it'll put it on the first point of the triangle there. So now we just got to deal with the scale and rotation. So in order to get the rotation, what we need to do is we need to vector subtract, and we need to subtract the 1 from 2 and 1 from 3, and that'll give us a vector going from point 1 to point 2 and point 1 to point 3. So that'll give us an up and a right vector basically. So now if we cross that and get a matrix to HPB, so we're going to get the cross product of the up and the right, and that'll give us the forward, and that'll be the up, and that'll be the right. So you'll see if we go into the rotation, now it's facing the wrong way. So you can fix that a couple ways. I'm just going to switch the cross here, and you can see now it's facing the proper direction. So now what I'm doing here is I'm going to get a vector length, because we got to deal with the scale. We need 2 of them, and we also need a make vector. And we want the z scale to be on 1, and then we'll control the x and the y with the length of these vectors here. So that'll scale the light to be the same size as the triangle. So the y and the x, and if we go into the scale, you can see it scales it right now. You'll notice that it's offset because we're centered on the first point and not the actual triangle itself. So the way we could fix this is we just got to move half the distance. So if we get a vector add 4, we take our position into that, and then if we just get 2 vector scales, and then if we scale the up and the right vectors, if we scale them by -50, both of them, you'll see it'll move the light into the correct position. So that pretty much is it as far as moving them. So if I clone these lights, however many points or however many polys we have there, I think it's 324. Yeah, so there's 325 polys, so we need to clone it 324 times. And you'll see that it'll place a light on each one of our triangles, scaled and rotated. So that's pretty much it for that. I'm going to delete them because now we got to deal with the color and the intensity, and that's pretty much the same exact thing. So I'm just going to go into the light color. I'm going to add a channel modifier, node channel modifier, and I'm going to get that same node network basically. I'm just going to copy it out of here. So that's just going to count through the points by 3 again. And you want to make sure that's on 1. That's the only thing that's important, is that point index is on 1. And then I'm going to select the color map from the first point of each triangle, and then we're going to get a tools color scaler, and we're just going to break out the red channel. So now if we do that on the other 2 channels, I'm just going to clone them on there. I just deleted the keys, so there's no keys. Pasted it in the green. We're going to switch it to green. Pasted it in the blue. Switch it to blue. So that takes care of the color. So now when we clone these lights, each light will have the color of that vertex color map. And like you could do some pretty elaborate things. Like you could even use the UV. Like there's a UV output too. Now I'm in the intensity, and I'm doing the same thing except I'm selecting the weight map instead. We don't need the color scaler, and just going to take the weight right into the scaler. So now our weight map will control the color of or the intensity of the lights. So that's pretty much it. Now I'll clone them again 324 times. And you can see they take on the light color and intensity over here. So now I'm just going to load that other object. Or no, what I'm doing here is oh, I made it so that they didn't render. Those triangles, we don't want them rendering. Now I'm going to the other object. Load it up. That's the first layer that had the hanger. Just going to set the camera up real quick. I actually should have moved it up here because this is actually past where I didn't make lights here. So you'll see there's no light on that little box to the left there. I should be up one more. That's where I meant to be. But I'll get to that in a second. So I'm just adjusting these render settings. This isn't really important. I'm just demoing this so that you can see it working. Now you can see those center lights are dimmer. The ones that are at 50% are kind of dim. So I'm not really adding that much light. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go into the weight paint tool. While I'm selected on the triangles layer. So now I could just adjust the intensity of all those center lights this way. Just by painting on this geometry here. So like I said, it was only the center ones that are at 50. I put them on 100. So now you'll see when I go back into VPR. They light up much more of the scene. I just feel like this is, for a type of scene like this where there's this many lights and you want to have real lights that you actually have some control over easily, this is the way to do it. So now I just loaded that other geometry in. That was the lights themselves, the luminous geometry. And I moved the camera up. So now there's luminous geometry where the lights are. The lights are sitting a little bit behind it. So the only thing we have to do here is, you'll notice when I go into VPR, you won't get anything. So what we want is, we don't want that luminous geometry to be seen by radiosity because it's not necessary because there's lights there, and we don't want it to cast a shadow. So you don't really, and I let that go for a good bit just so you can see how it cleans up. So now all I'm showing here is how you can still parent these lights to the whatever object you want. Like I'm just going to take all these lights here and drag them under the main station. And I'm also going to drag the luminous geometry under there. So now if you move the station around, the hanger, you'll see all the lights go. So you're not limited. You can still use no motion and then parent them to an object. So that's pretty much it. Hope you guys got something out of it. I see the instancing lights comes up all the time in the past, and I've been wanting to get to this because of the way he changed it. So like before, you had to be very careful about like that index. Like when you used it on object clones, you had to be that index became real finicky, and you had to go through each place you had it and redo the index and set it back to 1 before you cloned. Now you don't have to worry about any of that. So you could add 20 of those in every different parameter of the light, and it'll just suck the index right off of the clone itself. So that made this much more usable. As far as it's much more easy to deal with because you don't have to go into every place that you have one of those point info nodes and reset it before you do the clone. So that's pretty much it. Take care, guys.